All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's SaaS from Scratch session. I'm Vani from Kalaari Capital, and I'm truly excited to host someone who's very special and needs no introduction, Dheeraj Pandey. By the way, I know I'm going to get a lot of comments that my video is not on. I just ran into a Wi-Fi problem last minute. So I'm going to keep my video off so that we can have a great conversation with Dheeraj. But before we launch into the conversation, for me, Dheeraj is an extraordinary founder who not only exemplifies ambition, but also generosity. As the co-founder of Nutanix, he didn't just build a category defining company, he created life-changing wealth for hundreds of employees and, of course, his investors. And his latest venture, DevRev, he's back at it again. And we are going to ask him why. But building boldly, thinking long term, and doing what he's very good at. And more than that, he's also an angel investor and mentor. And Dheeraj continues to uplift the next generation of entrepreneurs, paying it forward with the same passion he brought to building his own company. And that's why he's really a special person. If you are a founder wondering how to scale with heart and build your vision and lead with purpose, Dheeraj is someone you must absolutely learn from. So, Dheeraj, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for such a long time, and it's really a pleasure to have you with us today, and welcome.
Thank you, Vani, and the pleasure is absolutely mine as well. The fact that your Wi-Fi is not working, maybe you can blame Netflix for that. A lot of people in the area may be streaming Netflix as well, but really appreciate you doing this, and I'm really looking forward to the show itself.
Yeah, you plan everything and then something goes off and you just have to go with the flow, and something we all know as founders. So today it's my last minute Wi-Fi glitch, but you're on camera, which is really all that matters. But Dheeraj, you founded Nutanix in 2009, and I,
Mhm.
of course, have crystallized the financial crisis of 2008 because it was a very painful time for me and, of course, many others. And what an achievement! You built a $20 billion company, something to be deeply proud of. What gave you, though, the conviction to start? You were quite young. And, what defines you as a founder, then leader, and today also a mentor? So, how did you find the courage to start?
You know, um, if I look back at 2009, a lot of it was like, okay, I've done 10 years of learning and working for other companies. I had worked for Trilogy. I had worked at a startup, which was something that Vinod had funded when he was still at Kleiner Perkins. So this is before his Khosla Venture days. I'd worked at Oracle for about 4.5 years, just shipping great code, which is databases and clustered software and distributed systems and so on. And then finally, a couple of years at a company that was building distributed data warehouses. It was called Astra Data. Uh, I got my green card and all that. And then just came a time when I'm like, there's this real impatience to go listen to your own gut. Um, and I think the courage really came from my wife because she made it easy. She made it simple. Um, I don't think we had a lot of complications in really thinking about what if I didn't have a job, because I was thinking about what's the worst. If this then doesn't work, then what's the worst thing? And the worst thing is you go back to a job because I was fortunate enough to have some great managers early on. in my career. My first manager in my life was Chris Hines, who eventually went on to become the CEO of company Indeed.com in Austin, Texas. And then my second really good manager was also Bipul and my manager, Bipul Sinha, who is currently the CEO of Rubrik. So both of us had a common manager in a person called Amit Ganesh. So I had two really good managers early on in my career, and I really felt good about how I was mentored and how I looked up to people who were like such integrative thinkers and really clear thinkers. So that clarity of thought actually came from folks who early on not just managed my day to day, but also mentored me as well. So between those things and the fact that I had a permanent residency and the fact that my wife was like, go for it. What's the worst? You can actually go back to a job. I think it all came together in 2009. Plus, the companionship of two other co-founders, the fact that the three of us were actually in this echo chamber of saying we can quit, we can quit, we can quit, actually all came together in 2009 in the worst of times. This was the worst of times of starting a company or even fetching a job. Finding a job was not that easy. And all that came together in 2009.
Well, congratulations. I think it's phenomenal what you have achieved. But I have a question related to that. Founders are often told to dream big. But when you started Nutanix, how big was your dream? Because today it's a very large company. And did you imagine it would become what it did? And if you look back, what assumptions did you make then that surprise you today?
Um, so I think the core idea was, fairly nebulous back then. I think we said, look, we understand distributed systems. We have done, at least Mohit and I, we had done distributed systems for like 10 years or something before that. And we were willing to make a bet on the fact that, people are going to use commodity hardware and open source software. And the idea of monoliths was actually dying. That was a very nebulous idea, but then it was a solution looking for a problem. We had seen consumer clouds do this, like um, Google and then Facebook was beginning to do it for like 4 or 5 years as well. Um, so we are like, if we could take this and democratize it and bring it to everybody, wouldn't they be as much value? If the consumer cloud companies are benefiting from this architecture, would there be value if we brought this thing to everybody? And there was an economic value as well, which is start small and pay as you grow. So why do you need to commit to big things if you can commit to small things? Um, was the architectural idea, there was some economic value attached to it, but it was still a solution looking for a problem. Lo and behold, we were like, hey, there's this new thing that's coming up, which is called virtualization. Why don't we apply our passion of distributed systems, of really using commodity servers to build infrastructure for this new idea called virtualization? And we had never done virtualization. I didn't even personally know how to spell virtualization. I mean, not literally, but what does it even mean to virtualize anything? And we learned it on the job. The next 2 3 years we had become very good at even spelling VMware and understanding how it all works. And one thing led to another, and we're like, every year we would actually get better at understanding a use case within virtualization. Not just virtualization as a use case, but within virtualization, how do you really think about different use cases? So the tip of the arrow had to keep getting sharper. So while we thought we had, wood behind the arrow, which was, hey, it's a large market, everybody wants to virtualize physical hardware, distributed systems should actually be a big enough market. And the other piece that made this useful was, this idea of design in fairly mundane fields like infrastructure. Infrastructure was not properly designed. It was basically being done in a very stodgy way, with hardware companies spending a lot of time designing hardware, but ignoring user interface, the human computer interaction piece itself. So as Apple was becoming a fairly important piece of our lives, I think just to apply a lot of ideas and concepts from Apple into the lives of the have-nots, who are these infrastructure administrators, was also a very important first 5 years of the company itself. I think, as I mentioned this recently, that we just took 1 year at a time. Now, both my co-founders left in the first couple of years, so it was something that none of us had planned for. They themselves went on to do, really good companies other than Nutanix. But you take every year at its sort of what it throws at you. There was immense adversity in the first 3, 4, 5 years in terms of product, and the fact that the underlying substrate, which was commodity hardware and VMware software, a lot of those things just refused to work, simply because the assumptions we had made were not right. But we had to really be steadfast and keep pushing and plowing and saying we're never going to give up, because once you're on this tightrope and you're walking a tightrope, it's impossible to turn around and do anything. So the idea that you're on the right path, the direction is right, yet the implementation is flaky, because we had a fairly tough time, as I said, really thinking about how this substrate on which we actually operate will ever work. uh, I think patience and tenacity paid off over time.
Dheeraj, a lot of our audience are really young and aspiring founders. And when we see someone like you, um, it's hard to imagine the early journey, when there is so much success and hence the adulation and all of that that goes with it. But part of this conversation is to help founders understand that the success today came with uh, the same kind of issues they are facing today, the doubt, the uncertainties, the um, uh, maybe fear, maybe finding of the courage, and all of that. So, really, my focus is on that early journey. You mentioned co-founders and the evolution of the founding team. So, when you look at those early years and the early decisions, whether it's how you chose co-founders, your first hires, your investors, customer focus, the many decisions that have to be made, what do you think has fundamentally shaped your long-term trajectory or the success that Nutanix has achieved? What were they all seem simple decisions at the time, or at least not so obvious decisions at the time, but with the luxury of hindsight, what do you think has really played a pivotal role?
um, I would say the most important thing, and it still is to date, for me, is, are you being authentic in the way you operate things day to day? Um, when I say authentic, I mean, is the design right? And I don't just mean product design, or I don't just mean back end and front end and the user interface. Uh, I mean being happy as well. Like, what does it mean to say every day you come to work and you feel like architecturally this is right? I'll give you an example of 2016. We go public, and I think the public market investors are like, okay, this is great. You guys are close to $1 billion now in less than 5 years of selling. Um, but what about the public cloud? And I think that, but what about the public cloud started to really come in the next couple of years. And I'm like, architecturally, the world is even going smaller, because we had thought that we had miniaturized infrastructure by making it go to no more than 3 nodes, and you can make a $20,000 decision to buy infrastructure over 3, 4, 5 years. But the world is making even smaller decisions. In public cloud, you can actually rent a VM for an hour or for a day, and then you can completely dispose it too. In fact, the idea of lambdas was coming together, which is like, hey, you can rent compute for tens of milliseconds or a second or 10 seconds. So we knew that this was needed to be solved for. So I personally am like, okay, we have to figure out how to become even smaller than what we were. And the architecture has to be cloud friendly, like really aligned with the idea of even smaller infrastructure than ever before. So to go back and really re-architect it as a business model change, which is what we did as a public company, going from hardware to software to subscription to annual contract value selling, was about just make it smaller and smaller and smaller and no smaller, as small as possible and no smaller. I think was something that was very, very important to the company. It's been the reason why the company has done so well in the last 4 or 5 years, is because we said we're going to be as aligned with the idea of consumption of infrastructure as possible. Um, I think along the way, just like my co-founders said, look, I'll be happier if I did something of my own. It was actually a great long-term decision for all of us. Everybody felt that they'll be able to spread their wings in their own companies that they form. It was probably the right thing. So making good, sound, long-term decisions where everybody is happy and is not thinking that we are hacking it up was really, really important. We knew that our product would have issues, which it did, but then we are like, we're not going to hack up customer support because it's the combination of our software and, of course, the human software, which is customer support, that really makes for a perfect thing. Because there's an imperfect thing, which is product. There's another imperfect thing, which is humans. Can you bring them together? And it's that combination, the yin and yang of software plus people around customer support. And this idea that, look, our developers, our product managers, our SCs, our reps, they'll all be honestly thinking hard about the customer all the time and in real time. I mean, we were the only company in 2014, 2015 using Slack for customer support. And the fact that we were real time meant that we were having a competitive advantage, which was uh, rare in the time, being real time, being extremely customer centric, having one pathway between the customer and the developer was extremely unique to us. And again, we're like, okay, we're not going to hack this up. We're not going to just look at customer support as a cost center, but how we made it look like a profit center. Those are the kind of things that completely make the company special. I mean, the idea of a net promoter score, the fact that we'll measure ourselves, the fact that the measure of a net promoter score will keep growing. Even as revenue grows, we are like, can we defy gravity and keep growing NPS as well? I mean, in the early years, we were at 72, 73, and it kept growing to 90 plus over the course of the next decade till 2020. I mean, we were doing about $1.8 billion in pure software revenue, and the NPS was 90. I think those are some of the things that I really felt like truly made the company.
Hearing you, Dheeraj, you are a deeply product centered person, also a leader, also a builder. Uh, and there are many hats a founder and a CEO wears, but some of them are core strengths and some of them are not. So, can you talk about your founder philosophy to what should a founder or a CEO, those are two separate roles, of course, could be the same person, take responsibility for vision, product, customers, investors. There are so many hats to wear, and we aren't all good at everything we do. So talk to us about that, as well as when everything is going great, you have now come back to basics and started DevRev. So being a founder again.
I think there's another role called investor, by the way. which
We'll come to that. Your role as an angel investor,
no, not
or
just that, but
maybe. Ah,
a founder is also an investor
mm,
because they own a meaningful chunk of the company, and they have to think about
mm,
the investor and the operator. And how do these two roles live together or not? Which is a decision that I made in 2020 that I'm now an investor. I need to operate some other idea. Having Rajiv come in and actually run that for the last 5 years and been phenomenal because I'm just an investor while he's operating the business. So I think the biggest one is really you are an investor and you are an operator. Now, within an operator, you have sub roles, uh, which is you're the CEO and you bring some level of vision. And I think equally importantly, this idea of an operator starts with people. And how do you really think about the various functions within the company? And do you bring taste? Taste is really, really important for people first. Not just your product and the vision and the roadmap, but also the taste for people. I think one of the hardest things to get right in operating a company is the taste for people, and it's the thing that tears you apart. It's basically
mm,
it's not easy. You bring a sense of entitlement about context. The word context is something that a lot of founders carry on their shoulders, like, I have the context. And it's the context of the original idea, but the idea has also evolved, and the market has evolved, and you have morphed and the company has morphed. So other people need to get that context. And if anything, some of the context that they might have, including your product person, your design person, your engineering people, your developers, your support people, your sales people, they all start to get and establish and create context. So the question is, who's the one who's going to bring it all together? So one of the other unsaid roles of a founder is to integrate it all together across all functions, across all activities of a company, and integrate it for the investors and the board members. I mean, obviously, you're also a board member. There's a role that a founder plays of a board member as well. So how do you really think of founders' first role as integrate? You have all these functions, they're great at, these tribes are great, the sales tribe, the engineering, the product, the design, the marketing, the support, and the finance, all these various tribes are really good at what they do. And you've chosen them from the fact that they're so good of a specialist. But if you take a bunch of specialists and put them in a room, it doesn't make a company. Somebody still has to integrate. And I think that's the biggest role of a founder. The fact that they could cohesively integrate multiple tribe leaders into one nation, called the company, and then use that to really communicate as simple as possible of what the company does, not just to customers and prospects and grassroots users, but also to other stakeholders like partners, like investors and other people alike itself. I think the biggest sort of thing that I think of all the time is, can a founder be T-shaped leader? And they
mm,
need to bring breadth, because with breadth, they'll actually understand how to integrate all these different functions. But what's the one thing they can be deep at? And different founders are deep at different
mm,
things. Uh, but if you are actually that curious about tech and product, it's great. But just bring depth in one thing and then breadth
mm,
in many other things where people can come to you and say, hey, we have a conflict and we got to resolve it. I think
mm,
founders' biggest role is to resolve conflicts, because that's when the
mm,
breadth really shows. And you're able to ask really good questions of a CFO who's been a specialist in all things financial planning and accounting and various other things. And you can ask first principles questions and then go help resolve the CFO's problem in terms of budget allocation with engineering, a product, or sales. I think the one thing that most people don't talk about, the biggest role, the biggest of the big roles in founding, is capital allocation. And
Mm,
I don't just mean dollars and cents, like managing a treasury and a balance sheet, which, by the way, is a very important piece of a founder's role, as the sort of goodness of a P&L, an income statement. I think we're not taught these things when we're really starting companies. But knowing that these do things which are as architecturally important as anything else, and what you do with code, I think is a very important piece of this. And if you can't understand the income statement, if you don't understand the balance sheet, if you don't know that one of the biggest roles you really play is capital allocation, I think you'll have a tough time. There's a
mm,
really good book that I read a long time ago. It's called The Outsiders. It's
mm.
about these 8 CEOs who had never done this before. They were the first time CEO. Many of them were new to their vertical, the industry that they were actually operating in, all of a sudden as a CEO of a company. Uh, the one thing that was common about these 8 CEOs that this book actually talks about is capital allocation. They were really,
Mm,
really good at capital allocation. We don't use this word often enough, but it's
mm.
probably one of the most important things in really not just founding a company, but also operating it.
It's a perspective. In all of these years, I've never heard anybody articulate as clearly as you have, and I so agree. Though I started out as a engineer who had never done an Excel before, I think learning that, and of course learning from great CFOs and others, was an important journey. But this is often not talked about. We could probably do a whole session around the art of capital allocation, and who better than you. But I'm going to switch to something else a little bit, because everybody's mind, every minute, we are thinking AI. So, in this AI first era, what are the large opportunities that you are personally excited about? And in that, have you given thought to India's opportunity or potential? Would you comment on that? And there's also fear, right, about AI. So, what's a healthy way for society and founders to embrace the inevitability of AI?
I look back and I'm like, Nutanix was my first company. And the idea actually went on to be sticky. This idea of distributed systems was really about building things that are small and it can keep extending and stretching the same small thing to become big. Was a very catchy idea. I mean, that's the power of and promise of distributed systems. But where we were playing was where the puck was. The puck was on-prem infrastructure, big hardware vendors selling monolithic solutions. VMware was actually a software company, but it was selling monolithic things, which is perpetual software licenses. They're also not that good with distributed systems, especially with massive amounts of data. So the incumbency we were going after is where the puck was. But where the puck was headed is basically where you could stream infrastructure. You don't have to own infrastructure like it was happening with music. Music was like, I don't need to own music. I could stream music. I think it was a similar thing that was happening in infrastructure as well. Now, why do I talk about this? The fact that the idea that we were on is where the puck was, but not where the puck was headed, is because it was my first company and I was willing to take technology risk, but not market risk. In 2012, 2013, the public cloud was still fairly nebulous, So, and we had started in 2009, so we couldn't have made any bets on the idea of a public cloud where people could rent as opposed to own. So, the reason why I say this is because I feel like had it not been for the public cloud, we'd be bigger than VMware. I mean, we probably would be a $100 billion company, not just a $20-25 billion company. So why is this relevant to the question you ask? I think in the world of AI, the puck where it's headed, I mean, and people are obviously talking about AGI, the fact that there's going to be artificial general intelligence, you will actually have human level agency. Uh, the good thing about founders right now is that they're all dreaming about where the puck is really headed. Because where the puck is right now, I think AI is okay. It's modern workflows connected dynamically in real time, maybe without any code between LLMs and data with MCP protocols and things like that. Um, it's fairly early days, but if people are able to think about the role that they're going to create an agent for, now that's a 10, 15, 20-year journey for any founder right now. So if they work backwards from that, they have a 20-year problem statement to think about, not the next 2 years alone. So many founders now they are lucky to really think about product management, which didn't come naturally to a lot of us because we were good at designing distributed systems and thinking about microservices and all that. But for the first time, we're all being forced to think about human roles. And that means that we need to get more specific and really do things and operate things and think about the way the role actually discharges its function, and work backwards from that. I think that is the piece that I feel is really exciting about founders of this era, because they're all being forced to naturally act like product managers. And that's what makes product management easier when you have something to copy from. Um, when we talk about Apple a lot and we feel so good about it, one of the reasons is because they actually had a parallel thing. Like, okay, that's how a music player looks. So we need to create that music player virtually as an app on a converged device called a smartphone. I think they had it easy to copy paste a lot of the skeuomorphic thinking of how a music player looks, how a camera looks, how a GPS device looks, and all that. Open source had it easy because they could copy from Oracle, they could copy from Windows. I think Amazon, in many ways, product management was fairly easy because open source existed and they just had to be great at operating it. I think for the first time, AI founders will find it easy to know what to copy from. It's the human role they need to copy from. Now, easier said than done. Most people won't get it right, but at least product management will come naturally in this coming decade for a lot of people itself. Um, about India, I feel like the young people, because they're part of Anglosphere, that's one of the most lucky things about India is that there's about 1 billion people who speak English. Now, why am I saying it's important? For one, they learn faster. There's so many things on YouTube and podcasts and Substack and all this. So they'll learn faster to be integrated with another 2, 3 billion people in the West. And then they can actually serve the West and they can even serve India that much faster. I mean, if anything, the one language that integrates North India and South India is English. So English is that important. Now, why has it become even more important is that English is the new programming language, which is just like you take a step back and say, what did I just say? Well, if you go back in time to the 60s and 70s, in fact, late 60s, punch cards, there was no software, there was no digital bits. You had to punch things, and that's how you instructed the machine to understand what you were trying to say and how it should operate, is using real atoms, which is holes in punch cards. Then we said, okay, we got to move to bits. And so we moved from atoms to bits and started doing zeros and ones and say, okay, this is how you do inputs. This is how you get outputs through zeros and ones. Uh, we call it a machine language. And then we put a little bit of English layer, we call it assembly. We put a little bit more English and we call that C. We put a little bit more structure of composition of objects and not just scalars, and thinking hard about reskinning the same thing and leverage, and we call that C++ and polymorphic languages. And then over and over again, we just kept making it simpler and simpler, more and more English-like, to the point where we stopped compiling code. We said, hey, we can just do it, do it live with interpreted code running on interpreters, Python interpreters, and JavaScript interpreters. The fact that these interpreters could actually run on a browser, was massive. I mean, the idea that a browser could run arbitrary code of TypeScript to JavaScript. So we kept making it more and more English-like, but never English until 2022, when the interpreter is the LLM. It's not a Python
Mm,
interpreter. It's not a JavaScript interpreter. It's the English interpreter. And that is powerful for India. In fact, we were trying to make a call on some arbitrage decision in talent. We're like, hey, where should we hire talent globally? And we actually decided not to go to a certain couple of countries because they were not good at English. And we're like, hey, if they can't build the best prompts, they can be the best programmers. So I think that's the power, that's the value of India, that people who are going to be expressive. Now, you still need to be expressive, not just being good at English or the fact that you can actually speak it is good enough. You need to be expressive, like poets were expressive, story writers are expressive. You need to tell stories to a computer now. To
mm,
really transfer the context, you have to tell stories to a computer through not just prompts, but also reasoning traces. I mean, if you look at the crawl, walk, run of AI, it goes from search to answers to reasoning. Search is fairly syntactic. You could argue that maybe semantic is a little bit of what search is, but answers gets a little bit more into composition of things coming from various sources. You'll have to write some code, maybe some prompts, but reasoning gets deeper into long chain of thought thinking and really getting into white collared work and senior white collared work like executive roles and so on. How do you reason? You have to think about English a lot. Reasoning traces are all in English, and you basically do fine tuning of models based on English. So I think India can really do well provided it knows how to leverage English of all these young people. I mean, we've started with labeling. I mean, there are all these companies that do labeling jobs for AI right now. I think that's just the beginning of English. Uh, that will also get competitive because now we have new kinds of architectures in AI alone where the teacher model is the frontier model and the student model is a smaller model like a Quen or a Llama. And the student is saying, I don't need to wait for humans to label data. I can have a bigger model label data. Now, that is still expensive right now. So the models are expensive than humans. But I think we have to imagine that in this coming decade, models, these big frontier models with 2 trillion parameters, will have so much wisdom, public wisdom, and generalized task wisdom that they'll compete with humans who are actually saying we're inexpensive compared to large frontier models. So I think India will also need to think hard about how to stay paranoid about these models becoming really good at generalized tasks. So the country has to become good at specialized tasks, not just generalized tasks. People who will come in the new generation, the coming 10 years, will need to understand a lot of that as well. Now, you had a third question, a third part of the question. I'm trying to figure what that was.
how does society embrace the fear of AI responsibly? And of course, founders within that, what role can they play?
Yeah, look, I'm going to be controversial here in the sense that I don't think a lot about it, and I'll tell you why I don't think a lot about it. I feel like, and we see this in our scriptures, in Gita, we've heard Krishna talk about this, that, you know, even God has to become a destroyer at times. Uh, so there's a yin to the yang. And everything in life, you can go back to fire and say, well, fire actually was a source of energy for so much. I mean, in Sapiens, Yuval Harari talks about the discovery of fire and that being the reason why the human brain became bigger because the intestines could get shorter because now you could have cooked meat rather than raw meat. So even fire had such positive sort of implications, but also such negative implications. I mean, it could burn down a house, it could take away lives. I mean, water, for all we talk about water today, but if you have too much water, you have a problem. You look at things as recent as 50, 60 years ago with nuclear energy. I think we still struggling with nuclear problems in Iran and the fact that, what if a country actually gets to have it when it shouldn't have it? I mean, nuclear power, nuclear energy has such negative connotations and implications attached to it. I mean, the internet, the first 5, 7 years of the internet, the killer apps were not good apps. I mean, it was pornography and it was gambling. So everything actually has a negative side to it. There's no yin without the yang in life, in nature, in physics. There's a question. There's a whole thing about duality in physics that we talk about. In nature, there's duality,
Mm.
which is the reason why quantum is going to become that important. The idea of quantum computing is duality. It's based on duality. So we just have to look at AI as being a dual thing, and it's going to be as much a destroyer of things as it's going to be a creator of things. And you just take that in its stead and say, look, individuals themselves will solve for this. Individuals have, in the last 200 years of industrial revolutions, individuals have said, look, I'm young, I'm going to actually make a decision based on the next 20, 30, 40 years of my career. Now, if you only have 5 more years left, you're like, I don't have to change. It happened with
Like
COBOL in the
me?
90s. Yeah, I mean, think about it. In the 90s, people who had only 5 more years left, they're like, I don't have to learn C++ or Java. I could just do COBOL for the next 5 years and I'll be fine. If anything, for the next 5 years after they retired, they became even more precious because people needed those COBOL programmers for many of the payroll programs and other such things that mainframes were still running. So I think society will figure this out. I'm not worried about it. Uh, every time somebody says this is going to be extremely destructive, I think they're also being dramatic, somewhat melodramatic, I would say. Human beings are just smarter than we all think, and especially the next generation is way smarter than the previous one, the way they've been actually brought up. So I don't worry too much. There will be short-term dislocations, which there's always short-term problems when you have long-term goodness. And that's the yang to the yin.
So much depth of clarity and wisdom, lot of things to think about, contemplate. Thank you for that, Dheeraj, a
Yeah, it's my
lot
pleasure.
for me to take through. Uh, Being a founder today, what would you advise, and how is that, say, different from a decade ago that you founded? For me, it's almost 3 decades ago that I started my first software company, enterprise software company, and it was a very different world then than today on every way. So, what is it that for today's founders looking ahead, you would advise when you're investing or when you're mentoring?
I think we talked a lot about language, but language is very important. And when I say language, and I talked a lot about English, but think about it. If you have a piece of software that is supposed to be an intelligent computer, and that's supposed to actually be an agent, that's supposed to now not compete, but really complement a human role, you have to contextualize how is that in Japan? And how is that in Germany? And how is that in Africa? And how is that, uh, in Latin America, and so on and so forth? You need to understand culture a lot more now than ever before. Now that machines
Mm,
and humans, I mean, it's getting interweaved like this, as
mm,
opposed to like this. It used to be like this. It's like, you remember the
mm,
Michelangelo thing.
mm,
I think it's becoming like this now. So you need to understand history maybe a lot more.
mm.
One of the things that we probably don't give credit to Microsoft for, uh, this is 35 years ago, 32 years ago. Why did Microsoft succeed more than any other company? And people say they chose Intel, which is smaller hardware, and the fact that they were the only ones who building on small hardware, and the small hardware was replicable at $2,000 a piece. But there's something else that they were very good at. I mean, for his time, Bill was still the pioneer of user interface thinking and uh, taking the thing from Xerox and saying I can make it maybe not as good as Apple, but good enough, and really probably building it for the enterprise and business software. But in that UI, there's a hidden element that Microsoft was the best at, even better than Apple: language. They were better at porting their software to so many languages that despite all the onslaught of open source and everything that came in the next 25, 30 years, they understood Mandarin, they understood Japanese, they understood German, they understood so many languages better than everybody else. And the hustle they brought to language thinking is why in China they're still so deeply rooted, despite the thing of open source and open office and Google Docs and all this stuff. It didn't matter to Microsoft. So founders have to get really, really good at language and portability and understanding how they're going to go to each country and look people in the eye and say, I know accounting. Like, what are you
mm,
talking about? You don't know accounting in Japan any more so
mm,
than you knew in US or India, accounting, I mean, the rules are different. We look at
mm,
ERP companies and say, oh, wow, that ERP company has built things for the laws of the land of that country around taxation and accounting and finance. That thing is actually going to become a much harder problem now because you need to understand these idea of human age or these AI
mm,
agents becoming that contextualized with the laws of the land of the country now. So become very good at international thinking from now on, because a generic horizontal software all in English is not good enough anymore.
mm,
Uh, History matters. I think history will matter a lot in the coming decades of product management. How do you think about human roles and how do you think about machine roles? Uh, there's a really good article that I think the audience should actually look at. It's one of my favorite articles in my career, I would say. It's called The Manager and the Moron.
mm,
Uh, it's by Peter Drucker, 1967. It was written in
mm.
1967.
No.
And he's now thinking about the computer in 1967. He's like, what does the manager do? And what does this thing do, which is called a computer? And it's just fascinating read to actually say, how are we conceiving of the computer in 1967 as a slave? We were thinking of the machine as a slave.
Mm,
And it's a great read. There's a last half of it, which says, beyond the number barrier. And it's an amazing read. It goes back to the question you asked about founders and their roles and what roles do they actually should discharge and be good at. So in that, he talks about the manager, Peter Drucker. This is like imagine
mm,
1967 and the computer. He's like, what do managers do and what do they suffer from in 67? He's like, they suffer from the fact that they were a middle manager and they got promoted to an executive, but they changed nothing about themselves. They knew they
mm,
were getting promoted because they're good at fighting fires. And they keep doing that when they become an executive. And in this case, you can talk about founders being good at fighting fires, but they don't realize that now they're getting paid to do something else, which is to think. And then you pause. He actually puts a colon and says, they don't
mm,
know what they're getting paid for, colon, to think.
mm,
So, what does a computer do now? And what does the human do now? You have to think better than the computer. And that is going to be a race
mm,
of the century. Can
mm,
we have way better judgment than this thing that can really bring context and weave in probabilities into a deep neural network and think and bring context and memory and a knowledge graph, all of this stuff better than you? I think that's the race of the century. We will evolve. I think we have evolved. We've looked at these species and we said we have to be better than that species. I think if we can actually uh, continue to look at AI as the fire, there's a chance that we'll probably have a bigger brain than what we had, now. Maybe 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years from now, we might actually have a bigger brain because we're using it for less chores and more thinking and so on. So again, it's a great read for those people who actually want to understand, even as they grow in their careers, even if you're not a founder, if you're actually into management, The Manager and the Moron, 1967 by P.V. Drucker.
We'll put these things in the comments also for others that are going to be watching all this later. But that's great. In fact, you addressed a couple of things I wanted us towards the end, and we're almost at the end. And what a great conversation it's been to get to know you a little better as a person, and wanted our audience to not just have these answers, but really know what drives Dheeraj. So I had a couple of just rapid fires. I was reading somewhere that you love fishing, which of course nobody in India understands what you're talking about, but and jamming. So two very different hobbies. And you just earlier talked about founders
Actually,
and the
maybe
role.
maybe maybe the internet hallucinated, or maybe LLMs hallucinated. I actually haven't done fishing except for once when I was forced to go as part of a team building. And jamming,
Oh,
I've never
maybe.
done jamming, so
Well,
maybe it is.
I was doing a Google search, but so this
Oh
goes the
wow.
prompt engineering. I'll send you this. So anyway, that leads me to this question. Where do leadership philosophies and just hobbies, which really is about something that's other than your core job, right? How do those two intertwine for you? And I ask this because I'm always fascinated about this, about people. And I know that a lot of things that interest me beyond my job also define what I bring to my job. So I'm really interested in
Yeah.
understanding that about you.
See, I think at the core, I feel like life and business. I wouldn't say just hobbies and work or job. It's life and business are actually lending a lot to each other. What you learn in business, you got to bring it to your children. Whatever discipline means, whatever working backwards means. I talk a lot about working backwards with children all the time. Like even like, okay, assume that you have to be there at 12, work backwards. Now, I learned that in business. So I'm bringing a lot of business ideas. I mean, I talk about this to our children all the time and they make fun of me. They're like, oh yeah, we got to be better than AI models, right? I'm like, I talk about judgment. They have to be better at judgment than AI models as they're growing, competing with LLMs. Um, Life has a lot that can be brought into business too. And in fact, that's the thing that a lot of executives and employees and um, functional leaders you actually hire, that's the thing that they look up to you for. How did you integrate conflicting thoughts of each department? Because they're all so good at their stuff. How do you integrate? A lot of those things actually come from life. And when I say life, I mean history. I think good founders can actually be learning a lot from history as well. So reading
Mm,
books, bringing a lot of those things from these books into life. Psychology, I think, is the core of humanism is psychology. Um, so bringing a lot of those things into business from life is very important. And then hobbies play a role there too. I mean, when I say I don't have a daily hobby, I read as much as I could. You'll see my collection of books here. You see all the stuff that I've yet to read completely.
mm,
But
mm.
uh, I think it plays a very important role. Travel plays an important role for me, for my family. We just 4 times a year, we're like, okay, let's really just focus on. I mean, you'll see me even in meetings, I don't pick up my phone. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to pick it up. In fact, I keep it away. It's inverted the other way, so I can't even see the screen. It's the same thing when I go with children to a vacation. I'm like, you know what? For the course of the day, I'm not going to peek into. DevRev, we built some really good mobile app for ourselves and for our customers. So the mobile apps can be extremely big distractions for your for anything you're doing with your family and your loved ones. So I try to actually be as mindful as I can without trying to, constantly, multitask. Whether it's a small meeting where I need to show that I'm mindful, or it's a vacation of a week where I'm actually going and just, enjoying history with my
Sorry.
children and my wife. I think it's important to bring that back when you come back after 7, 8 days, where you're fully charged and you have to really go get back to emails and your Slack and your mobile notifications and all that stuff. So being mindful is very important, and I think really traveling the world is a great way to be a good product manager who understands human agency, because you're bringing AI agents, you better understand human agency.
Last question of the day, Dheeraj. How do you, uh, what are sort of three things that define your day? Work, personal, family. Where do you, how much time and how do you think about that as a balance allocation? What do you do for yourself, work, and your family? How do you juggle that every day?
Mhm. I like the fact that you said three, because I love three, the power of three. I even
Mhm.
tell people have three children. They're like, "What are you talking about? I'm not even thinking of one." I'm like, "No, have three. Like, three is a crowd. Three is amazing. You can have
Uh,
five, but
do you have
don't
three
do five."
children, Dheeraj?
We do have three children, and I think it's an amazing thing. Uh, I think we owe it to humanity to actually have more children. I'm going to be controversial, like controversial again, but I think it helps to have a crowd, a real cacophony of sorts in your family. When you have three, a real cacophonous family. But we're also big into sarcasm and wit and humor and all this stuff. I mean, you need to teach children those things, because that will bring judgment that is going to be so authentic compared to AI models. But coming back to your question, what are the three things? First of all, I'll say, what are the three things I why for that I struggle for, that I should keep reminding myself every day for, is breathing, sleeping, and eating well. So I talk a lot about this. Breathe well. Even in meetings, when you are about to just give an answer
Explode.
and yeah, just give an answer and say, okay, let's take the shortcut and so on. And it happens, founders actually have this power of impatience, which is the bias for action. That is also their biggest liability, is impatience. So breathing helps, right? Because you breathe, you pause. I mean, even in speaking right now, when I'm talking to you right now, breathing is really recharging me to think more before I say anything. My next token needs to come out because I'm thinking better. In fact, it's funny. There's a really good paper. It's called the S1 paper on test time scaling, which came out like 3, 4 months ago. It actually talks about think time and how when LLMs have a think time, they actually produce better tokens. So breathe more, breathe better. Even in your public speeches, you got to breathe and give a pause. Eat well and sleep well. I think sleeping is very important. There's a really good book that every founder should read. It's called Why We Sleep, by Matt Walker. Like a really good read on sleeping and the effects of sleeping on health. So on an everyday basis, what do I think about? Am I doing this sustainably? Which means, am I completely giving up on health, or am I actually taking care of myself? Because if I can take care of myself, I can take care of my family. I can take care of my other family, which is the company, and so on. So really take care of health and think about all the markers, the observability that you need to look at, because good founders, good product managers, they're observable people. I mean, they believe in observability a lot. I mean, with AI, that even goes a step further. So observe your health, your body. It's very important. And I think the other piece around the day is, how do you show up on the same minute where the meeting starts? Not 2 minutes later. I feel very ashamed if I'm 2 minutes late. I apologize. I'm like, guys, I'm sorry I'm late. Even though it's only being a minute late, I'm like, uh, as founders, we have a bigger burden of proof and responsibility to show up exactly on time. So I feel proud of being the first one to log into Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. And I think finally, we don't do this enough. I think we should do this enough. Just having a family meal at the end of the day is so important. One of the things that I feel founders overlook and ignore is as you build a company, you're at war. You're at war in an underserved market against incumbency, against inertia, against no need for change. That's a war that you're upon. I mean, the big guys will actually try to crush you every day. How can you be at peace at home? It's very important because you can't have a war everywhere. Some place you need to have peace. And that peace means happiness. You come home, there's joy, you're hugging each other, you're laughing, you're making fun of each other. So it's really important to actually have that place that you come home and you're not being judged. And if anything, people around you are self-deprecating and self-effacing and all that. They're witty, they make fun of you, you make fun of yourself. I think all that is an extremely important part of the day as well.
So, Dheeraj, you have been so generous, not just with time, which of course is a lot, but also with just the depth of thoughts that you have shared with us. So many things resonate at such a core level for me, and I'm sure for everyone here that's listening in. All I can say is thank you.
Well, you really brought a lot of things that I probably have it subconsciously, but you brought it out, and I can't thank you enough for that, Pani. I really appreciate you also being persistent. I think I really enjoyed this thing, and I look forward to learning from you and everything that's around you as well.
Thank you. Have a great day, which is ahead of you. And there's a lot here that you talked about that we are going to sort of keep going back to. I'm going to keep going back to, and I think many other people too. But thanks for all of that and be well.
Thank you.